Uncommon is a production by Neuralle, a full-service digital agency. If you want to grow with a premium agency and have the ability to work with Jordan directly, then learn more at neuralle.com/media and request a callback. That's neuralle.com/media.
My name's Jordan Michaelides and I'm the host of Uncommon, a show that asks the why on business, media, current affairs and sport. This Uncommon Corona editions sees us catching up with prior guests that have been on the show to document how they're actually adapting to this once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, I guess you could call it. If you like the episode, of course, please do subscribe on YouTube. Hit that like button. It helps us, of course, with the algorithm. Show notes for all guests, including previous ones, can be found at neuralle.com/uncommon. For audio, if you want to listen on podcast, just search Uncommon on all your good podcast apps. And for social, to keep up to date behind the scenes, search at @uncommon_show. With that all being said, thanks for tuning in and let's get into the episode. My guest this week is Shura Taft, MC, host and celebrant, plus what I'm starting to dub as Dan Monheit 2.0, the new and improved. At least that's what he tells me. How was it meeting your long-lost cousin or brother?
Well, it's great to be back on the show, Jordan, firstly. And it's funny, actually, because, I mean, look, not everyone's going to know who Dan Monheit is and not everyone's going to know who I am, but we were told, the backstory is we were told independently of each other that we looked like each other. And he came on your show, you mentioned it. I came on your show, you mentioned it. So then we jokingly said, I think he reached out and said, ha, 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 people telling. We started chatting back and forth and we said, well, we should have a coffee. Let's do this. Because my wife actually knows him from back in the day. Anyway, so I messaged a mate of mine as I drove to this meeting. I said, how fun is this? I'm about to have coffee with a guy I've never met him before in my life, but people have often told me that I look like him. And he goes, that is so weird. And only you are the sort of person who would do that. I'm like, yeah, it's cool. Anyway, he's a great guy. We got along really well. We actually have a lot more connections than we thought we did.
Really?
And he, I was talking to him about some work stuff, and there's, I potentially would go in and just shadow him for a few days and see what he's doing because, I've already been thinking about some other work things, and he does some very interesting work and has done very well. I'm not sure how he's going with the COVID stuff because, to be honest with you, this was before that all hit. So, anyway, great guy, and I think we're both happy with the recognition of each other.
Yeah, I think I love Dan Monheit. He's been so helpful for me. He's very selfless in that regard. Like you were saying before about him, potentially thinking about getting you in to come in and shadow and learn. I said the same thing to him, but for Lauren, because Lauren's never really had a creative director role. She's always been a senior designer. So she's never had that experience in an agency firsthand of being a creative director. And I just said to him, would it be possible for her to sort of pick the brain of your creative director? He's like, yeah, sure, no worries. He just doesn't really mind helping people, which I feel like is uncommon in the industry.
There you go. Throw the name of the podcast in there. That's the way to do it. You've done it well. Got one mention.
He seems to be going okay, though. I spoke to him 2 weeks ago for his episode, and they'll survive. They'll be fine. They're lucky that they're a small independent agency as opposed to part of a wider network. Yeah. Your WPPs of the world. So I think they're in a really good position. And it's really fascinating to think that guy has only ever had one job, and it's the job he created for himself, outside of uni.
Yeah, that is really interesting. That is really interesting. I mean, I'm a bit the same in a sense, apart from the silly jobs you have when you're at university working in, cafes and all that sort of stuff, which I did, since in my adult working life, I've only really had one job, which is very varied as a host and celebrant. There's elements of the same thing, but in terms of that, I've only really had that. And this COVID thing has really opened up my eyes to, I think I talked about this last time we had the podcast, to the idea that unforeseen events can do incredible things, and they can kickstart new experiences and new learnings. And this thing has done that, I'm sure, for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been a fascinating time. Fascinating.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's made people innovate, and it's pressured people to do things that ordinarily that they would have put off or made excuses for. I know I've made excuses internally to myself around things like just even starting a YouTube channel and publishing more individual content and getting our whole, like right now on this desk, you know, you can see the usual thing in the background, which is what we work with. But now this whole desk that I would normally be working on is rigged up with a full-on camera, sound system and everything. And I just put that off for so long, telling myself, oh, no, we need to get this thing behind me perfect. I need to be, you know, very, less involved in that sort of production process before I finally go do this. And now I don't have any choice. So I feel like it's a nice forcing function in some regard. Do you, like, one of the things I had on my notes was this idea of scarification. I think a previous guest, Nick Hodges, mentioned this to me over email. And he's like, is this our generation's scarification moment? And I reckon it probably is. Like, it'll probably be the thing that we tell grandkids about.
This is an awful thing to kind of compare it to, because it's not in any sense like this, but it is in terms of what it meant to the person. And the Holocaust to my grandparents, they still talk about. Now, those 6 million people dying. I hope this is different. I mean, you never know, but was always kind of close to a conversation, depending on where you were headed with it. And it's like, yeah, well, we lived through or do you remember? You know about this. And I think that the difference with this one, interestingly, will be it's worldwide scarification. So unlike, say, the Holocaust, which affected the Jews and some other smaller gypsies and whatnot, this is going to affect so many people across the world in so many different ways, varying ways, so economic, physical, mental, whatever. I think the scarification won't be evident for maybe a generation. That's the thing that's so different about this is that was immediate. We knew after the Holocaust pretty quickly what had happened, and it was shocking and abhorrent, and it's been taught for generations how bad it was. This one, we're still living, and we're probably going to be living it for a few years, and then it takes a while for those stories to feel like my son and daughter. I've got a 3-year-old and a 11-week-old daughter. I mean, they'll never really comprehend it until, they're sort of in their early childhood. So like, you sort of 8, 9, 10, you can talk about it seriously and they actually understand it. So I think we're a long way off that scarification occurring, but it'll be for our lifetime for sure.
Yeah, I think it'll define us. Like, I feel like Lauren and I were talking about this with my grandmother she grew up in Foster in Gippsland, coming from sort of English stock, I guess you could say. And her life was defined by the Great Depression and World War II. So she probably would have been like, at the end of World War II, she might have been, if she married my grandfather in 51 at around 21. So she would have been around 15-ish years of age. Mm-hmm. So during that, she would have been like 12 to 15, sort of like pivotal moments for when you're a kid. You're talking about going from a kid to a teenager. And so she would always do things like tea bags. She would always reuse tea bags. There would always be tinned food. There would always be some sort of preserve. And we were just joking the other night because we bought a bunch of tin stuff when this started happening, because we knew that, having been in Japan during the typhoon, that supermarkets would be cleared out. And I didn't want to have to deal with that shit again. So we bought a bunch of tin stuff. And Lauren was just laughing like, wouldn't your grandmother be proud right now? Do you know what I mean? And so I feel like this will be the thing that, your kids will probably talk about in a second-hand way.
Well, it's definitely. And in the same way that, so my grandfather's still alive. He's 99. He's turning 100 in June, and hopefully we'll be able to do something for him, because at the moment we can't even see him. And I made a conscious effort a couple of years ago to kind of record some of his stories and just him talking about life. Because, these guys, and men and women who are that age who lived through some of the biggest technology changes ever. I mean, you only have to go back 100 years and there's no, not every house having running water and electricity and a fridge and a all the things that we just take for granted, right? And so much of that technological advancement has happened in the last 20 years, 30 years maybe. And I think about all the things that he's lived through, whether it's wars and depressions and recessions and all that sort of stuff. And that he would pass on to us. And sometimes you'd listen to it and go, oh yeah. And sometimes you'd just sort of drift out when you were a kid. And, for him, he's witnessing another one and sort of seeing how the effects are going to be on this sort of new generation that haven't lived through. We've lived through so few hardships.
I know.
We've endured nothing, yet we complain more than anyone.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what happens when you enjoy the luxuries of life and you're brought up with those luxuries.
Yeah.
So it was no big thing. I mean, it's interesting. A lot of immigrants and friends of mine who are from immigrant families are telling me that like their parents and grandparents are like, hey, man, we had bread and rations when we were growing up. You can deal with the fact that you've got to buy some packet of spaghetti and some dolmio sauce. You'll be okay.
This is nothing, man. To be honest, I'm loving this because I find that these moments are really what define people. You really get to see the true side of people during moments like this. It's interesting about your grandfather. Have you spoken to him about life during the Great Depression?
Yes, but I mean, so he was born in 1920.
Mm-hmm. So he would have been 9.
Yeah, so it was early on. And he was in Australia. He was living in Australia. His family were Russian.
Mm-hmm.
So again, they'd lived through sort of interesting times in Russia, and that's part of the reason why they came out here, because of the conditions out there and whatnot.
Pogroms as well happening in Russia.
Pogroms and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, it was just not safe. And Australia was the place to be. But yeah, I mean, his memory's pretty sharp. And in terms of depressions and recessions, I think it was a case of getting on with it. This is a thing that generation and the generation above them rolled up their sleeves and got it done. I think that, and I don't blame people now for feeling that way, because you can't compare it. We've grown up with knowing that we're going to have clothes on our back and electricity and heat and warmth and showers and whatnot. So because that's what you can't hold it against someone for expecting that's what the level of life should be. But I think those who've lived through the hardships and have also had it go, we've also had the other side of it. And let me tell you, this is a lot better and it's going to still be better. So just relax on the, but he's pretty level-headed. He wouldn't ever sit there and say to me, suck it up, princess. He just loves this. He loves conversation and talking about it and sharing of ideas. And the last time I saw him, the lockdown was only just starting and he wasn't quite sure where we were headed with it all. I do think about the older generation. I think it's really sad and lonely for the older generation.
Yeah.
Not to jump too quickly into something else, but you were talking before about, your grandmother and what it's like to be 14 at that time or whatever. And there is, if you look at every stage of life, there is an impact of this lockdown, this coronavirus that is this kind of special to that age group. So my son and daughter won't really know. It won't really affect them. He was off daycare for quite a while. We've just started back, but that was kind of an impact. But I think for kids who are homeschooling, that is a really weird thing. I think about my own childhood, what it would have been like to not see my friends, to not go to the park, to not play in the playground, to do all these things that are teenagers who are going through that really weird stage where you need friends and your boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. There's impacts all the way up to the 90-year-olds who have no one around them. It's insane loneliness.
Yeah, and also like thinking about what it must feel like for them if it gets into an aged care facility. Like we were watching a Vice News, I guess, doco on what's going on in Italy, and they went to one of these aged care facilities. And, Lauren and I were saying both our grandmothers passed away in the last year, and we were actually saying, thank God they passed away from what they passed away from. They both pretty much passed away in their sleep, so they had it. They had it pretty good.
That's the way to go.
It's the way to go. And this thing is horrible, man. It's so sad because the thing that people forget about old people is they were young too. Like they were just like you. You don't really change when you get older. You just, your facade ages. That's it. And so, watching this thing and they're going into the facility because they're being called out for the 6th time today to pick up a 93-year-old. And this woman is just like, she's fine. She's so switched on, like your grandfather, but she is clearly upset because she knows this is probably the end. And she doesn't have any dementia, no brain issues or anything. And she's so switched on, but she knows what's going on. She's just sort of crying while they're wheeling her out, and they're saying, it's okay, you'll be fine. But she knows, like, she's not dumb. No, she's probably thinking no one who's come out of this home has come back. So,
but also she would know, and this is the ultimate sadness about this whole thing, is it's not even just the fact that it kills people. It kills people in absolute isolation. And so,
you can't see family.
She's not going to see her family. I mean, one of my best girlfriends, I grew up with, one of my school friends, she just lost her mum, not to COVID, but quite out of the blue. I mean, she'd been a bit sick, but it was quite out of the blue, and they couldn't have a funeral. And she's still, and it's only a few weeks ago, she's still really, really grieving hard, and it's been a really tough time. And I feel for anyone who's gone through that, who's had to like witness a family member die from a remote location. The emotional scarring is almost the scariest thing about this, because let's be frank, in Australia, we've been exceptionally good, and credit to Scott Morrison, regardless of what I thought about him before and what I will probably continue to think about him. I think in this moment, the government's done a really good job.
They've done well.
So bravo to not just the government, but also to the Australian people, because I think we've done what was asked of us. We needed 80% of the population to kind of go along with this isolation. I reckon 90 have done it. There's been obviously a few people who've done the wrong thing. But because of that, we've managed to flatten the curve. It doesn't mean we're out of the woods, and it doesn't mean that we won't have more deaths. But to have 70 deaths at this point when we knew it was coming is pretty amazing.
Yeah.
But the emotional impact is going to be far-reaching. So next year and the years beyond, the mental health services are going to be called upon massively because of things like not being able to grieve family members who die, having missed out on relationship things that, I feel for people who were early on staging dating and stuff who might have just lost their love. A lot of people who are already lonely, who are only feeling more lonely. There's a lot that comes with this, and that's going to be the impact from next year and beyond.
Yeah, I think I was finishing off reading this book, about a deeper book about Stoicism recently. It was just talking about how often people will lament on things that have happened, worrying and sort of grieving. We spoke about it last time, the death of a child as an example. And I think you're right. I think people are not going to be able to grasp or understand what has happened in the last year for a very long time. It's got me thinking though about, you and I were probably in totally different mindsets to where we are now in comparison to January. I know that just for work, I had to sort of keep abreast of this stuff. And Lauren and I sort of really I started to notice like the start of Jan, when they started talking about the fact that these markets were being shut down in Wuhan. And I know here that the first time I went, okay, this is really serious, is when Japan, Hong Kong and Singapore in the space of a week all had a run on toilet paper. And I was like, okay, this is like, people are freaking out now. This is not good. This is when things get really, really bad. So I guess I'm curious from your perspective, when did you first start to take notice?
Well, we had a unique insight into this because my wife's father works in China. So we were aware, obviously the world was aware in December things were a bit weird in China. And we were getting word back from Brian that there's a bit going on, but it wasn't too much of a concern. He wasn't in Wuhan. He was in the Hangzhou province.
Does he live in China?
He does. Well, he lives part-time, and he's a basketball coach. He coaches in the Chinese Basketball Association. And coming into January, the word was whispering out that the Chinese Basketball Association were going to pause the league. And that in itself, so you got to put yourself back to that mindset. For me, in my mind, I'm going, they're going to pause a league. Like, that is a huge thing. That's like, I can't think of that happening in my lifetime, of like, apart from maybe strikes, baseball strikes in America and stuff like it. You just don't hear of that sort of thing. Yeah. So they're going to pause the league. And you're like, again, your mindset is what we normally have when we hear of SARS or MERS or bird flu. In Australia, we have been so immune to a lot of these things that you go, oh, SARS looks bad. Oh, it's bad in China. Anyway, flick over the next channel. And that's how we've always been. So, of course, I'm hearing that this is happening in China, and we're like, oh, it's bad. But anyway, let's get on with life in Australia. Then it becomes apparent that the league's definitely going to be postponed, and then it's going to be about what the players and the coaches do in the meantime. And we're speaking about that. And then it's like, look, you probably better think about coming home, because it sounds like this is more serious than we thought. And he's umming and ahhing, and the players don't know what they're doing. And there's quite a rigid structure over there in China in terms of what they do with the players. Right. Then they give the coaching staff the option to go home or stay. And it's like a couple of days. We're going, come. So he jumps on a plane, manages to get out the day before Australia starts to announce that they're looking at flights coming in and out, particularly from China. Now, what's really interesting is he came back to Australia. We had Elle, our daughter, on the 3rd of February. And I can't remember the date that he came back. It was around that time. He flew back into Melbourne from China, which was going through this crisis. This is February. No questions at the airport.
Yeah.
Didn't have to fill out a form. There was no temperature check. He left China where there was a temperature check and all that stuff. Nothing in Australia. No, you should isolate, nothing. He came back. Now, because we'd had our daughter, he chose, because what he read, to isolate for 14 days. So he went to a service department near where my mother-in-law lives, was in a service apartment by himself for 14 days, watching Netflix, eating food and whatnot. He chose to do that. Now, he wasn't, So we were like, that's amazing. Came out of it, saw the baby. And then Australia started to go into that sort of process with the lockdown. So he's lived through it twice. So in terms of when were we aware of it, we were kind of aware of it in January, February, that this was a thing. And then in terms of it being Australia, my mother-in-law, to her credit, and I was very like, overreaction, not going to happen here. That's, and I feel bad about that now. But she's telling us in late Jan, early February, she's like, you guys need to start buying up. Get some toilet paper, not hoarding, but like make sure you have enough of everything. We got a new baby, have enough formula, have enough baby Panadol. And I'm going, Amanda, just can't, it's not going to, like, Australia's going to be fine. She's wiser than I gave her credit for it. She's going, trust me, there's going to be things at the supermarket where they'll only let a certain amount of people in, and you'll have to have credits or coupons. And I'm going, like, sure, mate. So it's incredible to think that was even, like, we had that. Now we're so used to it, but that mindset of, like, even 2 months ago, if you'd said to someone, by the way, you won't be able to go into Coles if they've got a certain amount of people. Every shop in your country or city will have a plastic shield over the person working behind the counter. Like, there's all this stuff that's like, wow. It was
that week. I know. I would have agreed with your mother-in-law if I'd not gone through that typhoon in Japan. I remember that so vividly, where we basically did a podcast interview in Tokyo, and then it was like 5 p.m. and we get on the train back to Shibuya, where we were staying in sort of the center of Tokyo. And Lauren's like, fuck, like, this is more packed than usual. And people are like freaking, like, they have this freaked out look in their face, and there's a lot of people with bags of food and stuff. And we're like, okay, that's weird. Anyway, so we get off, we go to Shibuya, we put our stuff down, and we're like, maybe we should just go to the supermarket and buy some stuff, because we're going to need stuff for the next 48 hours because we're going to be locked inside. And we get to the shops and it's decimated. Like, there's nothing. And that was the moment where I said to myself, like, holy shit, like, people really, I can see how panic works now. And so we were having to come up with things like, okay, we bought noodles from this place, and then this place down the road had some dumplings left over that you could cook in the because we only had a microwave. So we didn't even have we did have a stove. We had a stove to heat up like boiled water and stuff like that. But that experience for us really reaffirmed that we needed to have things. And so we probably on 2 occasions bought about a week worth of tinned stuff. The thing I didn't think about was toilet paper. He was so desperate for that the bog rolls. It was ridiculous.
Which is now fine again. And there'd be so many people who I would hope are embarrassed with the amount of toilet paper they have.
Yeah.
And it's, to your point about panic, it's really just a I don't blame people, because we all get it, right? It's the same with anything. You can feel however you want. But when people around you start feeling something else, you can't help but go, should I be feeling that?
Yeah,
and
you
that's
start
what
second
panic
guessing.
is, right? So when you're standing in the supermarket and you notice, like I noticed this really uncomfortable feeling in the supermarket. It's kind of calmed down now, but it was present for about a month during that whole toilet paper thing. And even slightly before, there was like this, you're in the supermarket and everyone's like kind of looking at each other. What's in your basket? Why has that person got 10 things of pasta? Like it was uneasy. And that's where panic sets in, because you're like, well, I don't have that. Do I need to get, should I go and get some more toilet paper, some pasta sauce? And you're buying all this stuff that you really wouldn't normally eat or have, and you don't know why you've got a tin of refried beans, but you do. And but look, I think the positive, let's look at some positives for a second, because it's very easy to get bogged down in the negative, because it's a really negative and weird and unprecedented situation. One of the positives is, certainly with the people that I speak to, is a lot of people are discovering the love of things. Cooking is a big one. I've got so many mates around me who are cooking. Now, I cook a lot, so it's not that unusual for me. It's sort of business as usual, but mates experience and they're like, I've been cooking every day and it's been really good. I'm like, yeah, that's what most people do, but not everyone gets Uber Eats every night. Cooking, exercising, spending time with their children. There's been these positive things that have come from this that I hope will continue. I mean, the biggest one for me, which I find really interesting, is hygiene. Now, it's obviously played the biggest part in this whole how to stop the spread and whatever. For years, and people used to look at me very, very odd, but for years I have sneezed like this, achoo, into my T-shirt or my jumper in front of me, right? Pull it forward. And it was just a kind of knee-jerk, because I always felt it's weird to sneeze into your hands. I think it's...
Yeah, because then you're going to go shake hands.
Well, whatever. I mean, I've always been conscious of what's A, on my hands, but B, on what's other people's hands. It's so weird that we handshake anyway, because how do we know where anyone's... and you just have to be conscious of your own hand for a day and think about what you've scratched and what you've touched, and then think about, or you pick your nose, and then you shake someone's hand. It's the transferal of that is the most basic level of hand. So people getting their heads around that has been kind of very positive. Like, oh, wow, you've got to wash your hands. 20 seconds you're going to wash your hands for, or I'm using sanitizer now. If that changes the world forever, fantastic.
Do you think, well, I guess that was one of the things I was curious about. What will slingshot back? Will we go back to shaking hands, hugging? Will we give people a kiss on the cheek? What's going to be?
Hugging's fine. Kiss on the cheek's an interesting one. That's come in. I feel like that came in sort of the last 10 years or so, that you just kiss everyone hello, and it's like weird. I'm putting my face up against someone that I've only just met. Handshaking is interesting because it's so ingrained that when you come towards someone, it's like hand out. I mean, I'd be happy for the handshake to go. I think it's fraught with danger hygienically. It's fraught with danger for the people who shake too hard. It's yucky when someone's got a bit of a limp fish handshake. So that can go as far. I'd love to just salute someone as they walk towards me.
I could go with a fist bump.
Fist bump's fine.
I could go with that. That would make a bit more sense, because there's been moments, when you have that weird, awkward moment where you see someone and you've just been eating, or you've just washed your hands or something, and your hands. I get this because I'm not a germaphobe, but I'm like, okay, my hands aren't perfect right now. I really don't want to shake this person's hand, but they stick it out anyway, and you're like, oh, I'm sorry, my hand. But then it's such an awkward scenario.
Well, and I've watched people from afar cough into their hand, and then I'm about to greet them, and I'm like, now, do I not shake their hand, or do I say, I just saw you cough, I don't want to shake it? How do you play that? And that's something that we, sound like Jerry Seinfeld, but it's real. It might seem like a small thing, but if you watch any of the videos about how germs last on a hand and how washing doesn't even necessarily get it off if you don't scrub with soap for a certain amount of time, no wonder we transfer so many germs.
Well, events are going to be interesting, I guess, for you. Tell us about the events business, because I think of all the guests that we're having back in to talk about coronavirus, I feel like yours is probably the industry most hit.
Yeah, I don't know if it's the industry most hit, but I think it'll be the industry hardest hit eventually overall. So if you want to look at the events industry, and that's everything from weddings, corporate events, launches, charity balls, whatever, it's dead, right? It's stopped overnight. And everyone I know, wedding photographers, stylists, makeup artists, people like myself who are hosts, it was a real shock to see like your list of things go gone. And it happened kind of as the lockdown started. You're like, well, I wonder if they're still going to hold. Oh, no more than 100. That's gone. Boom. I held a wedding just before the lockdown, and they were lucky they had under 100 people. It was just before that when they made it 100 people inside. And so it's decimated an industry. Now, some of those people, myself included, are able to go on the JobKeeper program. Lucky because I'm a sole trader, so I've got my own business is me. Not everyone has that. And that's been sad because events, and I'd also say the entertainment industry, and I'm talking about comedians, musicians, people in the arts, get nothing. And this is what is so sad about this. I know the JobKeeper can't cover everyone, but I think they missed a trick with an industry that has given so much back to, the artists who helped out during the bushfire, who were asked to do things for free. And often in our industry, we're asked to do things for free. I'm asked to do things for free a lot, host events. Hey, we don't have a budget. Are you able to MC this? And you do some because you're like, yeah, it's the right thing to do, is not look after on the other side. So that's something that's really interesting about this whole thing is the events industry. And why I said I think it'll be the hardest hit is because if and when restrictions ease, and we still don't have any idea of how that'll happen, I think an easing will happen in the next month. The easing won't be do whatever you want. It's going to be social distancing, certain amount of people inside, whatever. Events take a long time to plan. As you know, you've planned a wedding. They don't happen overnight. So even if next month they said, all right, we're back to complete normal and everything is unrestricted, it's not like the next day someone's going to hold an event. If anything, I think it's going to take 6 months to a year before those things start to come back. And the companies that would normally, so if I'm flipping now into corporate events, the things that I normally host, companies who would normally spend $100,000 to $1 million on an event, they won't have that money and they won't be doing it because they'll see it as a waste. We'll just do a Zoom meeting instead, or we'll put something out on, some content out. So I think events, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. Companies like Harry the Hirer, they literally had zero income coming in, nothing. It's Australia's biggest hiring company and they had nothing. So I can't foresee the future for that industry. I worry a little bit that it's going to change it, and that I think a lot of people that I know are going to be out of work and having to pivot and shift. And it's something that I've thought about. And this is, again, if you want to look at it as a positive, one thing that I've looked at is potentially completely changing what I do. And that's just part of a situation like this that you can never plan for, while you've got to make hay.
What have you thought about, because you mentioned Dan Monheit earlier, what is the thing that you've thought about pivoting towards?
Well, I actually am looking at a completely different industry. I studied biomedical science at university and enjoyed anatomy and all the science that came with that. And I've spoken to a few people about industries that, or things that I could do within that industry. And the big one that came up time and time again was working with medical devices. So, you might work for a company that makes hip joints or ankle joints or whatever, and your job is to sell those into surgeons. And then you're actually in the surgery. You're scrubbed in and you're there as the product expert, if you will. And so I'm looking at that. I'm looking at a few things. I think that you'll see a lot of performers and people in the events industry will end up being something completely different, because I'm not sure the work will be there.
Do you think, though, when the work comes back, that you would be completely drawn back? Because I feel like part of why you're in the industry is the fact that personality-wise, you feed off that thing that is doing those events.
Of course. But I mean, for 6 years now that I've been with my wife, would it be my dream to continue doing television and radio and content? 100%. Is it out of my control in some aspects? Yes, it is. And when you've got 2 kids and a mortgage and all those things, you can't sit on your hands and say, well, I hope it happens. So the point is, put these things in place. And if next year, mid-year, someone taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, we've got this amazing opportunity for you to film this thing, well, then you look at it then.
Yeah.
I think in the meantime, if you sit here and just dream, it's going to be, unfortunately, it'll pass you by. And I'm 37, I'm 38 this year. Like 2020, for most people, myself included, is going to be wiped off the map.
Yeah, it's gone.
My 38th year or 37th year on the planet is just gone. So, age is creeping up. Not that I'm worried about that, but I think that it's important to look at what the next stage of your life is. And if this is the kick in the bum that you need to do something else, then so be it.
Yeah, it's a good, to think that you've been given that perspective. Like this year, I would agree. I think we had all these plans of things to do. We're even talking about this off the air about the wedding. Like, will the wedding even happen this year? There was so many things we wanted to do: new office, studio, staff, all that sort of stuff, and it's not going to happen because of this stuff. But there have been some positives, I think.
Well, you have to, like, if you can't find a positive in it, then you're going to wallow in that, and it's going to be self-fulfilling, and it'll bring you down. So you got to, because everyone is affected. Like your point about moving the wedding. I mean, I can tell you about a story about every single person I know in some way is affected, whether it's a holiday they don't get to have, whether it's, a friend of mine who packed up his entire life to move to London the week before this all hit, and now he's back with nothing. And, there's just a million of those stories. And G and I don't take for granted the fact that we're still very lucky. We've got a roof over our head, and we can afford to live for the moment in these uncertain times. My thoughts go to the people who don't have that, who are genuinely thinking about, can I put food on the table for my kids? Like, what do I do with them? What do I do paying my rent? Like that, it's excruciating to think about some of the hardships people are facing right now.
Yeah. Well, think about, you mentioned before about what the government's done. Like, imagine being in America right now. Like, I'm so glad just to even see, like, the stimulus package that was released here. It covers not just businesses, but individuals through the job seeker program. And I just think that it's just been so much better done, I guess, in comparison to the US. I think
we could do a whole podcast on America and I'm not an expert, but my sister lives there and she's pregnant. She's, almost 9 months pregnant with her second child, living in New York of all places.
Oh my God.
And they're looking to come home to live. And in fact, because my wife's husband is American and the visa is in process, but now this has all happened. The visa's just stopped for him to come to Australia in terms of just trying to get onto people because everything's closed. So I get a little insight into America through her. And I mean, where do you start? The fact of the matter is America is a country of countries. It's not one unified country. Like Australia, we can say that on the whole, Victoria, New South Wales, we're all part of the same. We have the same fabric. We have the same cultures. We are one people. Americans are not that. Republicans and Democrats are clearly not that. And, they've got a leader who is unable to lead. That's the truth. And there's a lot of lies and misinformation and all those things. And so, as I said, we can go further into this, but the fact of the matter is they're in a shambles. And if we thought we're in for a few years of tough times, I don't think they have any idea over there about what's about to hit them. These states who are trying to liberate themselves and do what they want. This virus does not go away. Yeah, you might not have any, in your area, but it only takes one person to infect 3 people to infect 50,000 people within 10 chains of that infection stage. So, yeah, it's going to be, I think America's got a long, long, long time ahead.
Have you
inherits that job?
Have you done much reading or thought, because I've always been fascinated by the geopolitics of this sort of stuff. One thing I've personally learnt, I think, in all this, and I think that the world has learnt, is that universally, a lot of people now believe that the Chinese government is a bad actor.
Yeah.
That's been the biggest thing for me. People that, no matter what side of politics they're on, have realized that, okay, actually, yes, this government is more like a dictatorship, and, things like the Uyghurs, that people just be like, oh yeah, next thing on the news. Okay, what's the next thing? They're actually starting to pay attention to that. I feel like my dad mentioned it to me the other day. He's like, you heard about these Uyghurs? Like, yeah.
Well,
I heard about that for years.
Well, and I got firsthand again because my father-in-law was coaching up in that region in Xinjiang. So we heard bits and he was living in a town which was like military operated, and the Uyghurs, like you were checked a lot when you left the compound by police. It was almost a military state, really up there. There's no doubt. I've read a lot about what goes on up there. I think that people look at China and go, what do they want out? What do they? It's kind of like if you don't look at the kind of the intention, you can't really read the play. And so you've got to go, what do they want out of all of this? And I'm not just talking about, COVID or whatever, but in terms of any of their actions, what goes on in the South China Sea, what happens with their people, how they control the media, the things that I've read about the medical, what they do with prisoners, particularly prisoners who've most likely committed no crime.
Political prisoners.
Political prisoners. So, but listen, they're stronger and more powerful than other countries who are doing the same thing. The fish rots from the head, right? So we know that it depends on how the country is led. Yeah. That determines these outcomes.
Yeah, it's been interesting because I've had friends who've gone to live and make lives in China, particularly in the finance sector and the tech sector, and they've all come back over the years. And I think you're right. Pinpointing it at the leadership is the best place to look, because they said the moment that Xi Jinping took over is when China changed. China went from a very open, forward-thinking country that was all about innovation and improving to just a very not authoritarian, but it was slow. That was one of the things that they said. It crept up on them, just like this virus. It sort of crept up in a way, and some of them that I've spoken to said they're not surprised at all that we're in this situation, because part of that modus operandi is to they tell me it's all about saving face. Like it's all about how you look in public as opposed to what's happening behind.
But that's great point. That is exactly what I've learned from my father-in-law, even just within sport. He was always very conscious because he learned that you've got to make sure saving face is more important than anything else. Yeah. So unlike, say here, if you got an offer from another club and you were able to take that, and then eventually your club would find out and they'd say, oh, you went behind our back. You just never do that in China. You cannot do those things. The reverence you need to show to your leaders, to your bosses, to the people around you is so different to Western culture. And if you don't understand that, you won't get very far in China. Because they do trust Westerners over there, but it depends on how you become part of their way of life.
Yeah. Lauren and I learned this going to Japan. I remember 2 years ago, I read about it. There was actually a research piece done by the CIA. It was like a criminology or psychology profiling, and it was around the cultural view of saving face and how it's really prominent in Greece, Arabic cultures, and sort of northern Asian cultures, so Japan, Korea, China, etc. And it's really interesting how, and it makes so much sense to me now, having come from a Greek background, why people would get fired up about things that you wouldn't see in like the Australian families that I would hang out with, and people wouldn't take things as personally as, say, relatives. So it helps, I guess, people explain why certain things happen, because in the West we're just dumbfounded, but actually when you think about that saving face culture, it makes a lot of sense.
The same way that
things happen.
The same way that I've always said, sometimes, and this is not to stereotype or generalize, but sometimes people think certain cultures, Chinese or Asian cultures, are rude because they push in, or they do, they kind of have a different way lining up. Or if you don't understand that in that country with over 1 billion people, that's just, if you don't do that, you don't get anything. Yeah. Well, then you'll think you'll put your own sort of impression on it and go, well, that's really rude. Well, it might be to us, but actually that's what it's always been done there. And it's kind of, there's this cross-cultural thing that with any of these things, that's why it's so frustrating we live in this offensive generation. I was having this conversation with a mate yesterday about how we're offended at everything. It's like, just step back for a second and think, how are you offended? Why are you offended? And really, does it affect your life? Or are you just bringing this up because you're like, this is going to be something worth talking about? Or I don't know, does it offend me if someone does something like that? No, I'm so lacking that offended gene. I don't know. Maybe some people just have it and they just can't get rid of it.
Yeah. I think it's definitely like a personality trait thing. I've had this discussion with my dad about it. I want to jump to...
Yes, let's go back to what we're talking about.
Another topic. Okay. One thing I had in these notes was around planning and strategy. This is something that we're asking people, and I feel like you've covered this already, but what do you think the next 6 months looks like for you?
I think it involves a certain level of upskilling, because there's no guarantees I'll have any work before the end of the year in terms of as hosting and presenting. So because of that, if I don't, and my wife's already, she's locked into a course. She's got a full-time job, but she's already locked into another course, because this is the time to be upskilling. You've got all these online courses being offered and there's time and you're at home. So going to do some upskilling. I'm going to look seriously into some other work prospects, as I talked to you about before. Going to spend as much time with my family as I can, because let's be honest, if this sort of thing doesn't open you up to the idea that life is short and finite and you only get one crack at this, well, nothing will. This is a pretty serious, we're seeing a lot of death around the world. So I think you've just got to take stock of where you're at and enjoy those things. So the rest of the year is going to be trying to plan the rest of my life, really. If I didn't already need to do it, now's the time.
Do you, like for you personally, what's been the most enjoyable thing that you've learnt about you and your family life?
What's the most enjoyable thing that I've learned? Well, interestingly, I don't know if this is enjoyable, but I guess I've always taken for granted that I think I'm a pretty good dad, and I'm pretty involved with my kids' lives, and I've always, people have often said, before I had kids, people were like, oh, you'll be a great dad. It was very nice. I'd always take that on board and go, that's really cool. But recently, our toddler is being a toddler, is being a 3-year-old boy, and he's difficult, and there's a lot of things that are hard about that. And my reactions to his acting out have often gone to more anger and, yelling and whatnot. And it's just not the way to be with a toddler. So if anything, I've learned a lot about how to parent in this time. And we're reading together a book called Toddler Taming. And a lot of the rules around how to deal with 3-year-olds and toddlers in general are completely the opposite of how I've been parenting my son. So if anything, one of the big things has been learning how to parent.
Yeah.
And change myself, not trying to change him, because he's a toddler. They're impulsive. They don't understand consequences. They will do things because they're in front of them and they want to do it. And it looks good and it looks fun. I'm going to hit you in the face. And not trying to put your adult mindset onto a child. So that's probably been enjoyable, if you want to put it in that terms.
Well, what does the book cover? I'm guessing it's sort of the way to tame a toddler is all about incentives, right?
No, it's actually, it covers everything from, feeding them, getting them to sleep, their behavior, particularly their behavioral stuff. The number one thing with toddlers is that they want your attention. Toddlers just want attention, regardless of what it is or who it is. It's just about attention. And if you're not giving them A-grade attention, now A-grade attention is, I'm in the moment with you, I'm looking at you, we're talking together, we're playing, we're reading, we're doing something. That is A-grade attention, that you are on them and they are, that's the world. Soon as they slip down to B grade, C grade, D grade, whatever attention, and our phones are out and whatever else, that's when they'll start to do things like, knock things off the table or pour a glass of water on the ground or hit you and all that sort of stuff. So it's about understanding how to give attention, how to let them understand that they can't always be the center of attention. And then it's dealing with the repercussions of their impulsiveness. So when they do an action, because anyone who has a toddler will tell you they will at some stage damage or break something that's important, or, they'll throw your computer on the ground or they'll pour water and they don't know that they're doing, and your immediate reaction is, what the hell? Like, anger. So this book just teaches you how to take steps to get to that. And it's not saying it's okay that these kids, you still want to have, teach your kids to do good behaviors. And one of the biggest things is affirmation of good behaviors. So you make sure you praise your toddler for everything they do that is good, even if it's simple as, well done on putting your shoes on. That was fantastic. I'm so proud of you for putting your shoes on, because they'll want to do good things. We, as human beings, even as adults, when someone says you've done something well done, congratulations, I'm proud of you, you get this feeling of like, thanks. Like, and as a toddler, it's no different.
Yeah, it must be that, but on steroids. Like, it would just be more intense.
Totally.
Yeah. Having kids is certainly going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to that stage of life.
Don't rush it, but you will enjoy it.
I was saying I was talking to Marty, or maybe, no, it was Charlotte Fox. I was talking to her about what's the thing you miss the most, and she said sleep.
Yep.
And so that has got me thinking, don't rush it too much.
Oh, sleep is probably number one, and it's closely matched by just the time that you had with your partner that was enjoyable. The reason why you marry your partner, those reasons slip away a little bit because your entire focus is your kids, and you don't get to do those nice things and just on a whim go out to dinner or we've hardly. I mean, isolation has done one thing, which is we've started watching shows again together, but we just never watched TV shows or we never even movies, all those things. Yeah,
you had I guess you could call it a date night the other night for someone's birthday. Was it your birthday or yours?
No, it was our anniversary.
Oh, that's right.
It was our 4-year wedding anniversary. So we, I cooked up a little feed. We had some red wine and we did it in our pajamas. But interestingly, the night before, I thought this was great. The night before, and I hope people are doing this sort of stuff, but one of my best mates, we set up a Zoom dinner. So we had 3 couples, and he sent catered food to all of us. So we were all eating the same thing and a bottle of wine, the same bottle. And so it was like we were at a dinner party, but we were doing it over Zoom because obviously we can't be together. And that was really cool. I like.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Innovative ways to sort of stay connected. And that's, again, talking about positives that come out of this whole thing. If you're not more connected with your friends in a funny sort of way, then something's going wrong, because right now everyone's checking in on people. You're going okay? Can we do this? Are we Zooming? So it's definitely a positive.
What's the sort of most annoying question that you've been asked during this whole period by people?
Well, the most annoying question that I'm asked every day, 50 times a day, it's simple. And it's why? Why? And that's my 3-year-old. Because again, going back to the book, and it's very common, I've read this in the book, they will ask you questions they don't care about the answer to because that's an attention thing. It's like, I'll say, buddy, don't do that. And he'll go, why? And I go, well, if you do that, that's going to break. Why? I can't, human this with it. And that's 10 whys in a row. So that's definitely the most annoying question I get asked.
I did that a lot as a kid, except
everyone does.
I still do it today.
Yeah, but you're searching for an answer though. These kids don't care.
Yeah, they don't give a shit. All right, let's jump into some rapid fire questions. Give us an insight into your morning and evening routine.
Well, morning is hoping that my son wakes up past 6 o'clock. Not always the case. We've got a little wake up clock that goes yellow. You can set the time so that they wake up to that. Currently it's 6:15 and he still hasn't made it till the bird gets yellow. So he's getting up at 5:45 to 6. So it's generally me begging him to go back to bed. He won't. I eventually get up. We go downstairs. He watches some ABC for kids. It's breakfast to start the day. And then we'll try and get him out. You need to get a toddler out of the house, particularly a boy, pretty quickly. So we might go for a scooter or a ride on the bike. And then now he's back at daycare. So we'll get him off to daycare. And then we're into the day. So that's the morning routine.
And what about evening? What are you sort of guys trying to do to decompress?
So evening is always the same. It's pick up Ed from daycare. He comes home. He's allowed to watch a little bit of television when he comes home. I'll cook dinner. While dinner's cooking, he'll come in and help. And then we eat with him. That's one of the big changes that's happened in isolation. We've been eating dinner at 5:30 or 5:45, which it's not the worst because it's easier to get him to eat when he's eating the same food as us, and we can kind of all have a family thing. We read a book and the baby's sitting up on the bouncer at the table, so that's quite nice. Then my wife will take him upstairs to do a bath or a shower. I'll bath my daughter over the kitchen sink and then get her a bottle and whatnot, try and get her down. When she's down, I'll flip with Gemma and read a last book to Ed. He'll go to bed because that's the other thing. Kids need structure. They need routine. Otherwise, if it's all over the shop, they'll be all over the shop. So it's got to be kind of the same for him. And then if we've got a moment, if our baby's not crying, because there's no guarantees that she'll sleep, we might have a glass of wine or, block of chocolate and watch something on TV or just connect. Because, again, with your relationship, you've got to try and keep up those things. So Gemma and I like to catch up and chat. And, and then it's bed by 9 or 9:30 because we don't know what we're going to get sleep-wise that night.
And if you think about something that you purchased either before this period or during this period, it might be less than $200. It's sort of become your go-to item, hobby, whatever it may be. Is there something that comes to mind at all?
Yeah, I reckon that's easy. Those who know me know I'm a pretty obsessive golfer. And golf courses have been, that's one of the biggest killer, this whole isolation is the golf courses have been closed. Now, I get it because it's a bad look, but I actually don't think it makes sense.
Yeah, I don't think it makes any sense.
Golf is the ultimate social isolation, really, because you play by yourself or you can play with someone else. Unlike any other sport, you never touch the opponent or the other person you're playing with, ball or club or anything. You can play where you don't touch the flags. There's a lot of things. I mean, other states have got golf courses open. Victoria's the only one that doesn't. So because there's no golf and everyone's at home, we'd probably be playing a bit of golf if we weren't. So I bought a little net and I've got a little kind of bit of mud grass and I just chip the ball around in the backyard.
Nice.
And that just keeps me sane because I need my golf. So that's probably the best purchase.
Yeah, I saw the Sam Newman protest. I think he's got a point. I think it is a bit ridiculous. I think that if we're talking about the impact of social health mental health and, the social system, you can't really say, mental health is really important and then ban something that actually helps people with that. I think it's
but playing devil's advocate, and I hate doing it because I want to be playing golf, but I think that if the rules are you can only leave the house for food, doctor, and an hour of essential exercise, it's hard to justify 4.5 hours on a golf course because you kind of got to cater for the people that are going to do the right thing and the people who aren't going to do the right thing. And there's going to be enough people not doing the right thing that it will look really bad. And then people are like, well, hang on a sec, what? So they can play golf, but I can't go to the gym.
Yeah.
You end up opening up too many but I'm hoping that I think by the next round of restriction easing that they will, because let's be honest, if the rest of Australia are playing golf and not Victoria, it's a bit hard to say you can't.
Yeah, I would agree with that. All right, last question for you. Doco, movie, TV show that you've been watching lately and would recommend to the audience?
Well, we did the Tiger King thing. Interestingly, my wife loved it. I liked it. I enjoyed it for what it was, but I think it was flawed in some ways, a lot of ways. Interesting characters, no. And you know what? Sometimes for documentary makers, it is absolute rolled gold when you go to make a documentary on something and something else happened. And that's exactly what happened in this case. There was, the documentary was meant to be about just sort of Joe Exotic and about the tigers living in America. And the next thing you know, you've got this unbelievable story with murders and arms being ripped off and all sorts of stuff. So that was pretty good. I think it's worth a watch. And the other one is, I've just started the Michael Jordan Last Dance, Chicago Bulls. And I think that anyone who's interested in sport, or even if you're sort of only fringe interested, this is one of the greatest, well, he's the greatest of all time, but, sports documentaries don't come more interesting than that. I've already watched the first 2 episodes and I'm hooked.
Yeah, I haven't watched it yet. I know it came out on Netflix on the other night.
Monday, yeah.
So I'm sort of just biding my time so I can properly binge. Because my problem is I'll start watching something at 9:30 or 9 p.m., but I generally hop into bed at 11. And so if it's going longer than that, I'm just going to go through and then I'll blow out my sleep patterns and it's just not a good
Well, I did watch The Test, which is the warts and all documentary about the Australian cricket team. It was made by a friend of mine, Adrian Brown, who I've worked with before. And, again, he was given unfettered access to the Australian cricket team post that whole crisis. And what he got was like the coming of age of all these stars, new controversies. It was just so well made. I binged it in 2 days. So that's another one. If you've got Amazon Prime, that's well worth watching.
I don't have Amazon Prime yet. However, the other day...
Yeah, but you get your free month and then you cancel it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, I bought an Apple TV, which has every single related possible digital channel you could possibly have. Because I've got the LG Smart TV doesn't have everything, and this has been a seriously fucking good purchase for us because I've been able to watch movies like Parasite for $4 that I never got to see at the cinema because I was too busy. So
that's good.
I quite like that. But Shura, thanks for coming on, mate. I really do appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Hopefully we can have this wedding in October, but if not, where can people find you on social media?
It's just at Shura Taft on Twitter and Instagram. At Shu marries you if you're interested in getting married, but you can hit me up anywhere. But I'll be around. I'll be here.
For sure.
Not going anywhere, Jordan. Not going anywhere, mate. I've got 2 kids and I'm in isolation. Help me.
All right. Thanks, mate.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you so much for watching Uncommon and this week's episode. If you like it, smash that like button. If you want to keep up to date with what we're doing, please do subscribe. We would love that. We'd love to build this audience that we're growing here of Uncommoners. If you want to keep up to date with audio, you can search for us on all of your good podcast apps. It's Uncommon or Uncommon Show. Will typically find us. For social, you want to see behind the scenes this amazing studio that I'm sitting in. Just search at Uncommon_show. And everything will be there, including our weekly promos. But look, thanks so much for stopping by. Until next time, thanks for watching.